It's always great each year to talk to my fellow film critics, film reviewers, to talk about the year in film. And it's now my great pleasure to be talking to Sharon Hurst, who is a film reviewer on a number of outlets. And Sharon, welcome to Movie Metropolis.
Thank you, Pete. Great to be back with you again this year.
Good to talk to you. It's always good to talk each year. And this has been quite an intriguing year for film releases after the writer's strike and all sorts of things, films being in backlog and so on. How have you found this year in film?
Well, I think I have to preface it by saying I tend to be very particular about what I choose. Not saying I necessarily choose great things, but I'm not a big person for blockbusters. So
Hmm.
what I comment on always tends to be a bit skewed, I think, towards foreign films, festival films, art house films. And overall, I have found it, as most years, very good, but not total craze standout. When I do my lists, I tend to
Hmm.
run it via an Excel spreadsheet and I pick out those that are usually not 9 and out of 10 and above. And I had a lot of eights this year, a lot of eights and a few eight and a halves, but to really pick the cream of them just maybe was a little bit harder this year. It didn't seem like a year where I said, "Oh, it's so difficult to choose." The ones that were high up were definitive standouts for me. And as you also know, I tend to categorize them according to, docos, choose a blockbuster. But my main films that I've loved are often what you would loosely call the art house films, I guess.
Okay, no, that's fair enough. Absolutely fine. So let's start off with the worst films because there have been a few stinkers have been released this
Yes.
year.
And I've heard on the grapevine that we totally agree on the turkey of the year, the nut farm. The
Oh.
nut farm. Oh, I was horrified by this. This so-called comedian, Arj Barker. Look, maybe he's funny in stand-up, but it was so puerile and infantile because being the name of the film, The Nut Farm, there were endless idiotic nut jokes. And I just thought, this is like boys in the playground. I did not crack a smile. I just groaned throughout. So that got Turkey of the Year. Then the others that I didn't have another standout turkey because generally, if I think they're going to be horrific or if I have read an advanced review, I just go, nope, I shan't go. But a couple disappointed me. For example, I adore Anthony Hopkins, and when I saw Freud's Last Session, I felt he was miscast. He didn't convince me as Dr. Freud. And so I had been so anticipating that film, and it was a letdown. Similarly, I love Catherine Deneuve. When I saw her in The President's Wife, I was very underwhelmed by that. Similarly, I adore Helen Mirren, and I had looked forward to Golda very much. Now, I'm not saying it was a bad film, but just something about the a sort of clunky feel to it. I mean, she came across as a very clunky character, and I didn't get a sense of anything about her much other than being the strategic battle commander. And I was disappointed with that. But it does not to say that any of those three were bad films. They just disappointed me. So fortunately, Pete, I didn't have too many downers other than the Nut Farm.
Okay. Very good. All right. Well, let's start. Let's go on to the list of good films of the year.
Okay, well, let's start with a few documentaries that really stood out for me. A couple of Aussie ones I loved. I adored A Horse Named Winx. In no way am I a horse racing walla. I have zero interest in this part of the world, but I thought it was a beautifully made documentary featuring a most gorgeous horse. And I just loved the way the film took the human element as well, the dedication of the trainers and everyone concerned with that horse and its welfare. I found it looked good. It just got me in from the word go. Loved the horse named Winx or called Winx, whatever it was called. So that was high up for me. The other Aussie doco that stood out was Midnight Oil, the hardest line. I loved the way that was made with the old video clips, albeit a bit grainy. The music blew me away. And again, I felt it really went deep inside the characters of that band, particularly, obviously, Peter Garrett. So that was a winner for me.
Okay.
Other docos, a couple of others that were standouts. I had not expected to love this as much. Super Slash Man, the Christopher Reeve story. Wow, what an inspiration. The way I mean, people think, yeah, it's about him as Superman. But of course, as people know, he was horrifically crippled as a relatively young man. And to see the inspiration that he gave to other people in a similar boat, people who were also quadriplegics, I found that such a compassionate, inspiring, and humanitarian documentary. Beautiful for me, that.
Yep.
Now, here's a bit one out of left field, as you and I always talk a lot about the Jewish International Film Festival, and I tend to watch at least a dozen every year there.
Yep.
This year there was this totally left of centre doco called Sabbath Queen about a young man born to a very religious line of rabbis who very early on in his life realizes he's gay and he thinks, uh-oh, I am not going to fit in so well into this family. So he does a bit of a runner to New York, joins into the very heavily into the gay scene there. And then because he also has a deep faith, sets up a synagogue, which he says is God optional. I love that about it. Any place of worship, God optional. But that was already the demonstration of his inclusiveness and his compassion. Anyone that wanted to just be a part of this celebration of togetherness and again humanitarian values was welcome. And it follows his crisis of how does he get the message through. He totally compassionate towards the Israel-Palestine situation, not hard line as a lot of his other mates and family back in Israel were. And I just found this such an unusual and interesting documentary that it keeps popping back in my head, and that's always a great sign of a film. So Sabbath Queen was high up for me.
Okay. Very good.
Okay, another standout. I didn't see a lot of animation this year, but two that struck me beautifully were Adam Elliott's Memoir of a Snail. I just love that guy's approach to life. And of course, as a film, the fact that he puts together what was the figure? You might remember 3,500 little plasticine clay type figures, and then
Yeah.
each one's moved in this stop motion claymation thing.
Yep.
And the story itself was just a delight. Now, Pete, I don't remember who did the voiceover for the main little character. Do you remember who voiced
Uh,
that?
I'm trying to remember.
Mm.
I know Cody Smith McPhee was one of the voiceovers,
Yes.
and
And
Jackie
Jackie
Weaver. Yeah.
Weaver, that's right, as her old
Yeah.
friend Ruby.
Yes.
Anyway, regardless, it was just a sweetheart of a film that had so many themes packed into it beyond belief about exclusion and bullying and self-acceptance and fatness and OCD, because she was obsessive in her collecting of everything that resembled a snail in her life. So I loved that to bits. The
Yep.
other animation I loved was Robot Dreams, a classic cartoony drawn thing about, again, loneliness, isolation, and a little robot who befriends a little dog who was a dog, I think. Very sweet film. So those two struck me as very worthy animations.
Yep.
Horror. I don't see a lot of horror, but Late Night with the Devil.
Ah,
Oh, what an interesting film. Was that a good one for you?
it was. I was very impressed. It sort of looked at
Yes, so left.
yeah, those late night talk shows and with Don Lane and all that, and turning it
That's
into
right.
horror.
That's
Yeah.
exactly. And that was so clever about it, in that you're seduced in the opening into thinking, oh, yeah, where's the horror in this? And then it gradually builds and builds to a totally chaotic finale. I thought that was a very, very smart film.
Yep.
Substance, also, I'm not saying it's a great film, but there was something so ooh, body horror to the max. And I thought that Demi Moore was very, very good in that. And now again, I'm going to forget the name of the young woman who acted opposite her, the
Margaret
British
Qualley.
girl. Thank you, Qualley. Yes, Margaret Qualley. Yes,
Yeah.
fabulous, about a woman who, and of course, it's lampooning the beauty industry, because a woman who wants to take this as yet untested substance to have a better, younger version of herself. And of course, when you muck with stuff like that, you don't know what Pandora's box you're opening. So that was quite a good horror. So there we go.
Yep.
Now, moving along, as you know, I don't see a lot of blockbusters. I really tend not to. And the one that stood out for me this year was June 2. I love the Frank Herbert books, so I'm a little bit biased. But for me, June 2 was a standout over and above June 1. I just thought, wow, the creation of that world, this planet, Arrakis, and everything that's in it. I thought it was beautifully realized. Some people criticized Timothy Chalamet as the lead, thinking he wasn't sort of macho enough, but I thought he was beautiful in his portrayal of a young, sensitive prince who wants the best for his people and is out to fight for the best. Everything about that film I thought was almost epic. And the standout, Austin Butler as the creepy dude in the Harkonnen family who had all his eyebrows and hair shaved off, which made him not the handsome dude he was in Elvis or Bike Rider, but totally creepy. And Sarsgaard, of course, as the big bad Baron. Anyone who loves a good sci-fi, I think, would really enjoy Dune too. So for me, that was my standout blockbuster.
Yeah,
Now, Peter, a couple that I don't know. Is it worth mentioning a couple of streamers? Because I do often review
sure.
things that are on stream. One of these is quite an old one, and I had had it on my list to see for a long while. Finally caught it, called Beasts of No Nation, about child soldiers in some unnamed African country.
Ah,
I felt it was very relevant to obviously all the ghastliness that goes on in the north of Africa these days. Just a beautiful story of a little boy who's ripped away from his family, forced to become a killer, what it does to someone mentally and emotionally, and I think based on a true story. If you have the strength to watch a film like this, because it is challenging and tough to watch, I think it's a really worthy film. The other one is something that was only a couple of years ago in the movies, and they've brought it to streaming, All of Us Strangers, with the wonderful Andrew Scott and Paul Mescal, who we've just seen in Gladiator, a blockbuster that didn't make my top list. I enjoyed it, but it didn't make my top 10. Top 20. Beautiful story of a gay love affair, but more about grief and coming to terms with self-acceptance, and a little bit of a perhaps supernatural element in that you don't know how much is in his head and how much is real. But I loved that film. I just found it so moving and beautiful, and it was streaming on one of the many platforms. So
yeah.
that's it for streamers. Now that brings me, here I am with my list, to the seriously top films, of which I have one, two, three, four, seven that were real standouts. Okay, so I know you tend to not include Boxing Day films, but because I've just seen this, Anora blew me away. Uh, it's a comedy. It really made me laugh, but it also has quite a heart to it. A story of a young sex worker, Anora, who calls herself Annie, Mikey Madison, who works in one of those strip joints and I think turns tricks on the side. And one day she meets a young Russian boy, the son of an oligarch, who decides he wants to hire her for the night, then likes her so much he's going to hire her for the week as a pretend girlfriend. And then, in a fit of lunacy, they go on a trip to Las Vegas and decide to get married. And then the fun starts because his parents over in Russia get wind of the fact that their naughty son has married a hooker and they better put an end to this. So not only do they get on a plane, but they send three heavy goons. Well, they're not all goons, but three heavy guys to try and break up the situation. And a madcap chase starts because after the trio break into the house where Igor and, not Igor, sorry, Ivan and Annie are living, which is actually his father's house.
Yep.
Ivan does runner, and then wife and the three go on a madcap chase to try and find him and sort of bring him back into the fold. She wants to bring him back to the marriage, but of course they want to force an annulment of the marriage. Very, very funny, but with a real heart to it underneath. I love the acting. Every role in this was a stunner, I thought. And it wasn't stereotyped. She, as a sex worker, wasn't stereotyped. You felt the person underneath. The three goons, I keep calling them, you felt what they were underneath, particularly the Igor character, who was nothing like what you thought he was going to be at the start, and a very beautiful ending concerning him. So this film, I hadn't laughed so much in a long time because, as you know, I don't see many funny films. And I just loved it. So that's an order, and it won the Palme d'Or. So it's been acclaimed. So, did you enjoy this?
Very much. Yeah.
Good, good, good. Yeah. Then going back to earlier in the year, Civil War with Kirsten Dunst as a journalist in a little team. It's slightly futuristic. They're moving their way across towards the White House. Civil War's broken out in America, and they want to interview the president before everything turns pear-shaped, and he's probably going to be murdered by the rebel forces. Now, it's pretty relevant for all of us who've been following the goings on in America. You think, this is a bit possibly close to the truth. So I thought it was just done with such pace and such tension and such good looking action scenes, such great characters, great scripting. The film had me really enthralled.
Yep.
Wonderful.
I agree.
Now, a totally different film, Perfect Days, Wim Wenders. Wim Wenders had decided he wanted to make a doco on these fabulous Japan. Everything about Japan that they build and do is fabulous. So Wenders wanted to do a doco about the toilets there, these beautiful architecturally designed, amazing toilets in Japan. But then he thought there's a story here. So he did an actual narrative about a guy who we get the idea was once in the corporate world but has given it all away and decides that he will simply become a man in service to the community to make the public toilets clean, but he has this perfectionism. Everything he does is done to the max, and he gets joy out of everything he does. And in between, he looks at the shadows of the leaves on the trees, at which point the film always goes into black and white. So it's got almost a spiritual, contemplative side to it, as well as this story of this man and his lovely niece who's doing a runner away from home. There you get a bit of a backstory about a suspected backstory about him and his family. But again, I keep using this word compassionate because I love films that dig into the depths of the human heart.
Mm.
And I really felt that this did, about a good human being who's had his troubles, but absolutely knows how to milk every moment in life. I love Perfect Days.
Yep.
Okay, further, yeah, all the rest are going to be in the same. No, not all of them. They're not all going to be in the same vein. But another one in the same vein is My Favorite Cake, which I just caught up with a few days ago, an Iranian film. Two directors who won a big award at the Berlinale. I think it was the Ecumenical Prize. And of course, Iran wouldn't let them out of the country to go and collect their award. So this is a tiny bit of the subtext of the film, but the film to me was more a film about loneliness, old age, and reinventing love in your old years. Beautiful story about a woman who's widowed, speaks with her girlfriends. Oh, could we ever find love at our age? Goes and instantly meets a man. And it's about the evening that they spent together, which is a total no-no, of course, in Iran. And oh, it was so delicate and understated. So many sweet scenes, such as, for example, they say, oh, have you ever had a shower with someone? Oh, let's have a shower. And the next scene, you see them sitting in their clothing under the pouring water and just laughing together. That sort of delicacy of filmmaking that was so, so beautiful. But underneath, there's still this subtle criticism of the Iranian system where, you know, she can reminisce on when she was able to wear a low neck dress and high heels. She says, oh, not this horrible old hijab and sneakers. So it's got its moments. And of course, the Iranians got their knickers in a twist about this one.
Yeah.
So I loved that film.
It is
Beautiful,
a
beautiful film. Now,
terrific film.
another,
Yeah.
yes, wasn't it? Now, here's another one where the government's got their knickers in a twist.
Yep.
The Polish government this time, Agnieszka Holland, who's
Ah,
78 years old, yes, has made a film, doco, in black and white. Not docudrama, I would call it. I mean,
yep.
it's a narrative, but she's based it heavily upon testaments, hasn't she, from refugees.
Yes.
It's about a plane load of refugees who are flown to Belarus, where they've been promised they will have easy access to the EU. But the minute they arrive, things are not good for them. The government of Belarus and Poland do the dirty on them. No one wants them, and they are literally tossed from pillar to post from one border to another, while the Polish guards are brutal to them and treat them almost like animals. The film, it's very long and it works almost in chapters. You have the personal aspect of a little family. Then you have the perspective of the Polish guards, who are about as brutal as the film makes out, with the exception of one who can see the humanity of these people and decides to do something that could cost him his job. Then you have the perspective of the activists who are brave enough to go in just within the confines of the law and give these people fresh clothes and food and so on. Because it's all shot in black and white, it has that extra pointedness, that extra highlighting
Mm.
of what's going on. I found that a really, really good choice. Oh, again, a tough film to watch, but so resonant for today's world, Pete. You know, it's
Yes.
just a winner.
And we should
And
mention
you
that's
probably know
Green Border is the title.
Green
Yes.
Border. Yes, I
Yes.
didn't mention its title, did I? Sorry,
No.
it's called Green Border because they're dumped in that forest area between
Yes.
Poland and Belarus. Yes, I forgot to mention its title. Now, something a little bit different and out there. I mentioned Andrew Scott before because he was in that All of Us Strangers. I don't usually enjoy a lot films that are made of theatre pieces, but this year I reviewed Vanya based on Chekhov's Uncle Vanya.
Yeah.
And Andrew Scott played every single character in that play, which I think I counted up was well more than a dozen. I don't know. He played Helena. He played everybody.
Yep.
And the way he did it was, I mean, I guess the film is all about the acting because you can't do too much filmically with something on the stage. But I was just sitting there gobsmacked at this guy's acting ability. So when he comes in as Helena, he sort of grabs his pearls and puts on a different voice. And when suddenly he's in a different chair and he's looking at Helena and he's Vanya, and then he's the old housekeeper, and then he's the housekeeper's wife, then the niece who's in love with whoever it was. There's so many characters I couldn't keep track. But that guy's acting, if you want an acting masterclass, get to see somehow this film, Vanya. It is, for me, one of my top films.
Yes. Well,
So I
it's
think
it's
we're heading for my very last one.
just before you do that, I just want to mention National Theatre
Yes,
Live has some very good film productions. I remember Prima Facie, which was
yes.
so strong as well. Um,
Is yes, it got to my sort of top films, but not quite over that 9 out of 10. I think for me it was about 8.5 out of 10.
aha.
Yes, Jodie Comer, who people
Yes.
know from the series Killing Eve. Whoa, what a performance! One person performance.
Yes.
That's another acting masterclass. Yes, yeah, good mention. So my final one, and I look, I think I choose this film just because, again, emotionally, I tend to review very much based upon my emotions. If a film's good, but it doesn't touch me, I can respect it and admire it, but not like it. But this one, oh, did this move me? It's called Touch, a Japanese Icelandic production about an old man whose doctor says, "You got troubles, you better get your affairs in order." So he thinks, oh, is there anyone in my life I might like to see again? And he reminisces back to when he was a young man, had travelled to London, worked in a Japanese restaurant, fell in love with the daughter of the owner of the restaurant. And she had disappeared out of his life. He thinks, will I ever find her again? So it's one of those films that toggles in time between him on the hunt for her and the story of their love affair back in his youth. It's one of those films with box of tissue films, but not mawkishly sentimental. Just again, understatedly, emotionally, beautifully done. A love story for me that, if someone can't relate to that, they're very hard-hearted. It was a beauty for me. So that ended up very much in my top list again. So yeah, that was my year in film, Pete.
And
I mean, a
such a
few great performances here and there.
yeah.
Yes,
I was
sorry.
just going to say, such a good eclectic list of films from various sources and diversity, which is fantastic. It's good to have a list like yours, which can be quite different to other critics' lists.
It is pretty different, isn't it? I mean, people probably think, oh, where do I see that film? They're not quite sure where they're going to find it. But
Yeah.
fortunately, sometimes people trot off to, quite a few people I trotted off to see Touch and said to me, oh, thank you. I wouldn't have gone to that
Mm.
otherwise. So I do like to be able to find those films that are a little bit different because yeah, it's great that there's a big film industry out there, but some of them they come and go and they're so unmemorable. They last a week in the cinema, don't they? And then
Yes.
They're gone, and I never even think of them again. So
Yep.
yeah, I like to have those unusual ones on my list.
Excellent list, Sharon. Always great to talk to you. And I know we've got more previews coming up because there's a big release pattern coming up for Boxing Day and early next year.
There is, yes, yes. I actually caught the Robbie Williams film the other night,
Oh,
and
Better Man, yes.
most yes, amazing. We had talked about it. I think I couldn't quite. People know that he's in the guise of a sort of chimpanzee face, and
Yep.
I couldn't quite come to terms with that. I loved the vibrancy of it. I loved his story, but I'm still now every time I think of him, I see a chimpanzee, which I don't like that. This handsome man. But I guess there's reasons for it. He
There
felt
is.
like he was a performing monkey, didn't he, during his life?
Yes. Well, he was happy with that. He wanted that sort of, in a sense, anonymity in his
Yes,
biopic. So Michael
yes,
Gracie, who directed it, went along with that, and it seemed to work pretty well.
yes, it did. I mean, it was a very full-on film. It's such a fascinating story, particularly of this guy's demons and the way he's fought them all his life. And as a music film, I love music films, so of
Yes.
course, mopping away in my seat to that one. Yes, and as you said, fabulous coming up. We've got the bloke who directed Great Beauty is coming up with Parthenope, isn't it,
Yes,
for
exactly
Boxing
right.
Day?
Paolo Sorrentino. Yes, yes.
Yes, Sorrentino. Very
Which
good stuff coming up.
it is. I saw that at the Italian Film Festival. It is very good. Um,
Okay, yeah.
Not quite in the league of Great Beauty, but it's still
Oh,
very good.
okay.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
yes, I'm looking forward to that. I'll see
Yes,
that next week. Yeah, so and then it starts all over again with awards season. Already we have the Golden Globe nominations and it just rolls along, doesn't it?
yes, yes, yes. And there's some other films which we won't talk about now because they're going into next year's list
No,
anyway.
no.
But there's some very
Next year,
strong
that's right.
films. Yeah, yeah. Sharon, thank you so much. We've been talking to Sharon Hurst, fellow film critic. Just mention your website so people can look at your reviews.
Okay, it's www.hurstos5minutefilms.blogspot.com.au. And the reason it's called 5 Minute Films is I promised myself when I started it I would not take more than 5 minutes to write the review. Well, I take a lot more than 5 minutes, and you add on the time to watch the film. So it's sort of blown out to something more, a bit of a monster more than I expected, but that's the site.
Fair
Hursto's
enough.
5 Minute Film.
Have a look at Sharon's site for her reviews. And Sharon, as always, a pleasure talking with you. Thank you so much.
And with you, Pete. Have a lovely holiday season.
You too. All the best. Bye bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Okay.